Have you had a good week? Some of you. Thursday, I had to drive down and back to New York. Christina's parents are going to be moving up here next week. And so we're excited about that. But right now, we're in the process of trying to get them moved. And it's not easy. I don't know how many of you have moved from, you had a big house and now you're trying to downsize as you get older. Well, it is not easy to do. So I drove down Thursday morning. They had gone down. Christina drove them down on Wednesday because they were up here visiting. And then I drove down Thursday. And on the way, have you ever noticed there are sometimes, usually young men, who are weaving in and out of traffic? Now, I can't get too hard on them because that used to be me a long time ago. I haven't done that in a while, but there were these guys weaving in and out of traffic at different times. And now at this point in my life, I'm like, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? Do you realize what's going to happen? And sure enough, all of a sudden, all the cars started slowing down and brake lights, and I'm stuck in traffic and finally get to where it is. And yet one of them caused an accident. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, but a bunch of cars got smashed up a little bit. And there were the two other people, innocent people, just been driving wherever they were going. And because of these guys just weaving in and out and splitting the lanes and doing all that crazy stuff, they caused an accident. And now we were all stuck in the mess they had made. And not just we weren't just stuck in the mess. The truth is we were all contributing to it too, because you know the word rubbernecking? So we're all like, ooh, what happened? And we're like, that's what you get. That kind of thing as we drive by. And so now we're slowing the traffic down even more. Have you ever been caught in a mess someone else made? All the time. Have you ever made a mess someone else was caught in? It's sometimes harder to think of those, but you know it's true. And then have you ever been caught up in a mess that someone else made and then the way you acted or behaved only ended up making the mess worse? You know what that's like in life? We've been talking about the origin story of our faith. And we've done that by tracing back to Abraham and his wife Sarah and how they learned to have faith in God. Because Scripture presents them as the patriarch and matriarch of our faith. Today, what they're going to learn the hard way is that the quickest way to make a mess is to not trust God to keep his promises and to try and kind of force God's promises. They're going to learn that today, and we're going to learn that along with them, but our focus today isn't really going to be on Abraham and Sarah. It's going to be on another person who got caught up in their mess making and then who made it worse because of what they did, and we're going to look at what that person learned about who God is and what it means to trust God and have faith in God in the midst of the messes that we create. So go to Genesis chapter 16. I know some of you, the Notes app has been messed up, and that's my fault the last couple weeks. I didn't trigger the right date, and it kept moving it, so it should work fine today. I tested it out. You can go to the Notes app. If you have our app on your phone, just go to the homepage of our app and scroll down till you see the Notes button and click it, and then you can follow along with the scripture there, and you can take notes to help you remember the things God might be saying to you this morning. Look, I'm going to share God's word with you. Really, your part is to take it and say, how is this going to apply to my life? God, I understand the truth of what your word says, but how does this apply to me right now where I am today and what I should be doing? So open that up. You can follow on the screen too, or just open up your own Bible to Genesis chapter 16. And let's start by just looking at the mess that Abraham and Sarah made. Here's their story. Verse 1, now Sarah, Abraham's wife, had not been able to bear children for him, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarah said to Abram, the Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her. And Abram agreed with Sarah's proposal. So Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar and the Egyptian servant and gave her to Abram as a wife. This happened 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan. Now, all right, it's a lot of stuff there. Before you judge, let's observe the facts of the case and what's going on. It's been 10 years. That last verse told us. 10 years since God made a promise to Abraham, I'm going to make you into a great nation. Abraham's in his 80s now. And God had promised, I'm going to make you into a great nation. Your descendants are going to be as many as the sands on the beach, as many as the stars in the sky. That was God's promise 10 years ago. Now look, if I promise to give you $1,000 and a couple weeks go by, You may say, hey, do you remember you promised you were going to give me $1,000? I went and got some things because I thought that was coming. A year goes by, you'd be like, all right, let me remind you one more time. Remember, you promised you were going to give me $1,000? At what point would you give up and just decide I'm a liar? Would it take you 10 years? Probably not. 10 years have gone by. And what triggers this is also the likelihood that Sarah has now gone through menopause. And she assumes, all right, God's bypassed me. He has forgotten about me. How is God's promise to Abraham going to get fulfilled? What can we do? And well, there was one solution in their world, in their time. And it was a common solution. This wasn't out of the ordinary. We have law codes that we have found from a couple different ancient Near East cultures around this very situation where a couple isn't having children. What will they do? And there's laws about it. What the wife does is the wife goes and she chooses a surrogate. The husband doesn't get to choose because they weren't stupid. So the wife gets to choose a surrogate to have a child with the husband. And then the rule is that child then belongs to the original wife. And the surrogate, she doesn't get elevated above the wife because not having children would look like, oh, maybe God doesn't favor you, or, people would compare themselves. And there was very strict rules around how this whole thing went. The wife chose, the child goes to that original wife, and the woman, the surrogate who had the child, is not ever elevated above the wife. That's how it's supposed to go. They were doing what everyone else did around them, and it was normal to them. Now, if they were to jump in a time machine, if one of them had found a time machine sitting in the desert there, and fast forwarded to today, and got out and heard us talking about in vitro fertilization or artificial insemination, they would probably have the same response that we have to this. They would say, what? Why would you do that? You could just do this. So what they were doing wasn't unusual. Everyone else did this was the solution that everyone else used. The problem was this isn't what God had told them to do. They never asked God about how God was going to fulfill his promise, and they got to a point where it looked impossible from what they could tell that God will fulfill this promise. There are times in this life when it looks impossible that God is going to fulfill the promise of bringing justice and new creation to this world, aren't there? Times when it may seem impossible that, God is actually going to redeem your life and rescue you and save you and bring you into new life forever. That might seem impossible sometimes, and to them it did. So what did they start doing? They started trying to make it happen. And what they did is they made a mess. And there's a little signal in the text. And give it to those of you who love studying the Bible and reading closely. And let me just point this out to you because it's a fun little thing. The author of Genesis, when he wrote the creation story, you go back and read Genesis. Remember when Adam and Eve failed? What happened? It says Eve took the fruit and gave it to Adam. And he says it in a very particular way. And then here a few chapters later, he says, so Sarah took Hagar and gave her to Abram. And it's a very particular phrase that he uses over again to signal to us that a similar failure is happening, a failure to trust God to fulfill his promises and to try and grab it yourself. Sarah failed the same way. Abraham then failed the same way as Adam by instead of saying, no, we're going to trust God for this, he said, okay, and bit into the apple, the fruit, whatever it was. In this case, Abraham went and slept with Hagar. And here's what happened. Verse 4. So Abraham had sexual relations with Hagar and she became pregnant. But when Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to mistreat her mistress. She began to treat her with contempt. Then Sarah said to Abraham, this is your fault. I put my servant into your arms, but now that she's pregnant, she treats me with contempt. The Lord will show who's wrong, you or me. Abraham replied, look, she's your servant, so deal with her as you see fit. And then Sarah treated Hagar so harshly that she finally ran away. I mean, what a mess here that was made because they didn't trust God for what he was promising them. And there's Hagar caught up in Abraham and Sarah's mess. She didn't ask for this. But then Hagar made it worse because she did the same thing you and I often do. She brought her own pride and arrogance to the situation. She started to look down on Sarah and treat her with contempt. Look, childbearing is still a thorny issue in our world today, maybe even more thorny. People balk at the idea of it meaning much and whether you need to have children in order to be a woman, and there's still fights about that today. Try and rewind and go back thousands of years to what would have been happening there, where childbearing meant everything to them. If you couldn't have children, then what were you? Because the whole wealth was in having children. Prosperity was in having children. And you could just hear the kinds of things that Hagar might have been thinking, hopefully not out loud, but the looks she would give Sarah. Oh, you weren't able to be the wife I am to Abram. I'm a much better wife than you are. I'm a much better woman than you are. You obviously, God's not with you. God's forgotten about you. Like, imagine the things she might have said or thought. And imagine how that would have played on Sarah, who all those years had been just hurting and longing and hoping to fulfill this promise. And now she's letting it go. Just imagine the emotional turmoil of that moment. And Abraham did nothing to step in and stop it. Abraham did nothing to step in and set things right. Sarah is my wife, first wife. No, you will not abuse her. You will not condemn her, look down on her. You're not elevated above her. That's not the way this is supposed to go. And so instead, Abraham says, forget it. You guys deal with it. I don't want anything to deal with it. It's, for whatever reasons, usually it's laziness. He didn't want to get involved. And he leaves it to Sarah. She's yours. You deal with her. And she wasn't just Hagar would not have been just some random servant girl that Sarah picked. She probably was Sarah's right-hand person, like her personal assistant kind of level person. And he's like, you deal with her. And Sarah puts the full force of her anger and just focuses it on Hagar so badly that Hagar, who's now pregnant and vulnerable, decides to leave behind the whole tribe, the whole community, and get out on the road alone, a pregnant woman, and travel back to Egypt where she had come from. She had joined them when they were in Egypt and come with them. And she's ready to walk it's well over 200 miles, maybe 300 miles from where they are to wherever she came from in Egypt. She's willing to go do that, get on the road by herself, a pregnant woman in a dangerous world on a dangerous road, because she'd rather do that and likely be killed or worse than stay another minute in this house, because the mess has become so toxic and so bad. And so in the end, the solution that Sarah thought of, and Abraham said, yeah, good idea, I'm in. What did it do? What did it produce for them? Their solution, instead of trusting God. You have a fracture between Abraham and Sarah. There's something broken between them because Abraham has allowed his wife to be mistreated. Then Abraham refused to take responsibility and get involved and do what he ought to do as a husband in that home. He puts it on Sarah to deal with it. And then Sarah, in her anger, abuses Hagar. And now Hagar has run away with Abraham's only chance at legacy. There goes the promise out the door, run away. It's a mess. Their whole plan failed to do anything but make things worse and make a mess. Whenever we fail to trust God, to keep his promises, and then start trying to maneuver everything ourselves, we end up making messes that only take us backwards. So Hagar gets caught up in Abraham and Sarah's mess. She makes it worse. And then she does what a lot of us do when we find ourselves caught up in someone else's mess or that we're making worse. She takes off and runs away. And Abraham doesn't go look for her, and Sarah doesn't go look for her. No one goes to look for her. Well, almost no one. Let's see what happens next. Verse 7, the angel of the Lord found Hagar. So God went looking for her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a spring of water in the wilderness along the road to Shur. The angel said to her, Hagar, Sarah's servant, where have you come from, and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress, Sarah, she replied. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her authority. And then he added, I will give you more descendants than you can count. That angel, sent by God to find her, asks two questions that are crucial whenever you and I find ourselves caught up in the messes we've made or someone else has made that we're contributing to. Where have you come from? and where are you going? Where have you come from? And where are you going? Think about that for yourself. What might the answers be? Where have you come from and where are you going? Here you are, you're just running away. Where have you come from? Where are you going? Hagar could have answered that, well, I'm going back to where I came from. I'm going back to Egypt. I'm going back because the life there was comfortable, at least from her memory and what she's done in her selective memory. She's imagining it was more comfortable than what I'm doing, what's happening with me now. And so she just said, let me go back. I'm just going to go back to that because that was better than this. And we often do that. We often try to just go back and get what was. Try to get back to the fun of our 20s and teens. Try and get back to when life was simpler and we were a kid. Try and get back to when our body didn't hurt every time we got up in the morning, right? We're always trying to, if I could just get back to when, my work was like this, get back to when church was like this, get back to when our life group was, get back. I just want to get back. There's something about us that keeps always looking backwards. Try driving home that way. And so she's looking backwards. And that's the surest way not to move forward. I want to show you a clip I saw a couple weeks ago. It's the Kenyan ambassador to the United Nations, Martin Kimani. And he was addressing the UN Security Council. Some of you might have seen his address. This is a couple weeks ago. And he was talking about the situation in Ukraine. And he was talking about Vladimir Putin and other people's desire to go back to the greatness that was the USSR by forcing these other nations back into the fold. And he compared it to the choice that Africans had to make after they threw off the shackles of the British Empire and were in control of their own continent and their nations and destiny. I want you to listen to what he says carefully. It's just a minute and a half long. Listen to what he says.
Kenya and almost every African country was birthed by the ending of empire. Our borders were not of our own drawing. They were drawn in the distant colonial metropoles of London, Paris, and Lisbon, with no regard for the ancient nations that they cleaved apart. Today, across the border of every single African country live our countrymen with whom we share deep historical, cultural, and linguistic bonds. At independence, had we chosen to pursue states on the basis of ethnic, racial, or religious homogeneity, we would still be waging bloody wars these many decades later. Instead, we agreed that we would settle for the borders that we inherited, but we would still pursue continental political, economic, and legal integration. Rather than form nations that looked ever backwards into history with a dangerous nostalgia, we chose to look forward to a greatness none of our many nations and peoples had ever known. We chose to follow the rules of the Organization of African Unity and the United Nations Charter, not because our borders satisfied us, but because we wanted something greater, forged in peace.
Dangerous nostalgia. When we find ourselves in messes, whether they're of our own making or we're caught in other people's, sometimes a dangerous nostalgia sets in and we just want to run away from the mess we're in back to that last time we were safe. Like someone who dove off a boat into the ocean and they're getting scared because the waves are choppy. I'm just going to swim back to the boat. Like we have that feeling. Let me just go back. Let me just go back. Look, he said it there himself. They didn't want to just escape the mess they were in by going back to messes that had been. They wanted to look forward with peace as the goal. And look, I read at least one article that was complaining about the things he said, pointing out that, well, the leadership in Kenya hasn't necessarily been helpful in this at times, and then starting to pick apart all the different ways it's failed. They've failed to achieve this beautiful vision that he just presented of moving forward and reaching across the national boundaries there on the continent of Africa. And they were pointing out, look, this hasn't really been so smooth and great. And I think the response to that is, of course, because we don't get peace by replacing one human in charge with another human in charge. One human making a mess, it doesn't get better by just putting a different human in there. They're just going to make a different mess, or maybe the same mess. That's not what the fix is going to be. So when this angel steps up to Hagar there, What he's presenting to her is a way forward in peace, a way out of the mess, really out of the mess. That's what he's presenting to her. And at first it sounds like going back. When we read it, you may think, well, no, he's telling her just to go back home. But hear it again. What he's saying first is, stop going backwards. You're trying to head back to Egypt, where you grew up and raised, where your parents and everybody, you're trying to get back to that. Stop that. Return to the place that God had you, because you were in the place where God could bless you. You were among God's people. I promised Abraham I would bless him, I would bless those who bless him, and through whom I would bless the nations. You were in the place where I could bless you when you were there, among God's people. Return to that place and keep moving forward. I know they made a mess. I know that it hurt you, but return there. Return there, and he doesn't say just say return there. He says return there and submit. Why? What's he telling her? Return there and stop contributing to the mess by failing to do what you should be doing. Don't go back there with that attitude you had, that arrogant attitude. I'm the one who decides whether you have children or not. It's all in my control. You go back and do what you're supposed to do. That's what he's saying to her. And then that last line that we read there, that last bit in verse 10, is where he points her toward God's way forward. He says, I will give you more descendants than you can count. And look, I know that doesn't hit you and me the way it hit her. Like, that would have made her faint to hear that. To us today, the closest thing I can think of that might hit us is if you were to go home and on your way into your house, find a lottery ticket, because you don't play the lottery, right? It's the self-imposed tax for the mathematically challenged who don't trust God, so don't play the lottery. But you find a lottery ticket and you walk into your door and you scratch it or whatever, and you win the Mega Millions, and so millions and millions of dollars, and that means that you're gonna be all set for life, and your children are gonna be set for life, and your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren, and your great-great-grandchildren, because you will have had more money than you know what to do with, and you will be set for life. For her to hear that she's gonna have more descendants than she can count is like being told you've won the Mega Millions for us today, because they value children the way we value the dollar. Here's this woman caught up in the mess made by God's people. She's running away. And she's contributed to the mess. Don't let her off the hook, but now that she's in this place, God seeks for her. God searches her out and makes this promise to her. Why should she believe him? Here's why. Look at what happens next. Verse 11. And the angel also said, you are now pregnant and will give birth to a son, and you are to name him Ishmael, which means God hears, for the Lord has heard your cry of distress. This son of yours will be a wild man, as untamed as a wild donkey. He will raise his fist against everyone, and everyone will be against him. Yes, he will live in open hostility against all his relatives. Thereafter, Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord who had spoken to her. She said, you are the God who sees me. She also said, have I truly seen the one who sees me? So that well where God met her was named, the angel met her, was named Bir Lahai Roi, which means well of the living one who sees me. It can still be found between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar gave Abram a son, and Abram named him Ishmael. Abraham was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. Naming is important. We got two names in that passage, and they tell a huge story. The first name is the name God gives to Abram and Hagar's child, Ishmael, which means God hears. And what God is saying is, Hagar, you were caught up in a mess. You made that mess even worse by your behavior. You then ran away because you thought no one heard you or cared. I heard you. That's who I am. I am the God who hears. I am not some dead thing that you've assigned value to. I am the God who hears you. And then something else happens. Names are important. Names bestow honor. And there's another name given in what we just read. This time it's a name given to God. And this is the only time in the Bible when God gets a name that he doesn't give himself. It's the only time in Scripture when someone gives a name to God. All the other times, God is the one claiming, here's my name, this is how you'll know me. And so here's a name that describes an attribute of God. I am God who is all-seeing. I'm God who knows all. I'm God who is all-powerful. I'm God who provides. All these other times, God is the one who's initiating his name or showing who he is. This is the only time when he is given a name by someone. And it's this young girl, Hagar, there in the wilderness, pregnant and running away from the mess. And she is the only one who gives God a name, and the name is God sees me. God sees me. Everyone else, they didn't even notice I left. They're not looking for me. They're not out after me. God came looking and saw me. He saw the misery. He saw the pain. He saw my failures. He saw it all. He's the God who sees me and knows me. And she trusts God's promise to redeem the whole situation, redeem the whole mess, to clean it up, because she knows, she's experienced God as the one who hears her and the one who sees her personally, intimately. And look, that did not mean that the messes were over. Her going back, her obeying God and trusting God and putting her faith in God did not mean the messes were over. It's very clear Ishmael's life is going to be full of messes. We'll see that in a couple weeks when we pick up the rest of their story. The legacy of Abraham and Sarah's mess-making here reverberates throughout generations. But God still sees, and God hears, and most of all, God redeems. God didn't just hear her cries and see her there running away. God took her whole life and the mess and all of it, and he redeemed it, gave it purpose. That's what God does. You know, you could point out that you were born into this world and it was already a mess before you got here, right? We were born into this. We didn't make the mess. It was here when we got here, right? We were all born into this mess. But then the truth is, you've contributed your part to the mess also, right? You've contributed, you've done things, you've brought messiness into this world by the way you behaved. Someone's got to step in and clean up the mess, don't they? Someone's got to take this mess and redeem it. Because we appoint leader after leader and no one can fix it. No one can wash it away. Everyone we appoint in leadership, I don't care if it's a president, I don't care if it's a senator or a governor or a king, whatever it is, they just do what? They make messes. And we talk about them like, oh, I can't believe they made a mess. But then you turn around and look at your own house. And I don't mean like this laundry on the floor. I mean the relationships and the messes we make because we don't care and we don't love and we don't show respect to one another because we're selfish, because we're sinful. Look at the messes we make of every situation. We're prideful, we're arrogant. When we all get tangled up in each other's messes, we get trapped and snared. We start running away from all of it, trying to escape it, trying to get away. And Jesus steps in and deliberately, purposely walks right into this mess that we were born into, but that we've contributed to. And he walks into it being perfect and pure. And he takes the mess on himself and he cleans it up with his own life by giving his life for us. And he makes a way to redeem all the messes and have them turn into something beautiful and new, a new creation through him. That's what Jesus has done. That's the big picture of all of it. God working to clean up the mess that we make when we fail to trust him. And Jesus giving his life to make that possible. So listen, just reflect personally for a minute here. What mess are you in right now? Some of you are in a mess right now, and you're the whole time you've been thinking about, yep, I'm in this mess. It could be a mess that's going on in your marriage. It could be a mess with your kids. It could be a mess of a friendship, a mess with any other kind of relationship. It could be just an internal, personal mess that you just see you've turned into a mess, especially after these last 2 years that have been so hard and so difficult. And you just feel like, it's a mess in here. What mess have you been dragged into? Do the messes of your childhood still tangle you up? Do the messes of what others have done to you still scar you? Are they still open wounds even on you? Do your own messes haunt you? I know to this day there are things I remember like I did when I was a kid or a teenager, I think, oh man, I probably really hurt that person, or how did I make that person feel about themselves? And I'll never see the person again. I don't even know how to reach them. And I think, what did I do? Did I hurt them? And sometimes those things will haunt us too, the messes we know we've made. And then what you and I end up doing is we try to run away and cover up those messes, trying to escape them. And we've got all kinds of ways. I mean, humanity hasn't changed that much in the last several thousand years from when Hagar was running away. We have different ways of running away maybe than they do, than the ancient people did. When they ran away, they ran away. But even some of the ways we run away today are the same as theirs. They would run away into getting drunk and drinking. We run away into drinking. We run away into substances. We run away into cheap relationships. Now we run away into digital pseudo relationships. And we escape everything by let me just go hang out over in this world, in this pretend world, in this meta world, and I'll escape all the horrible stuff that I have no control over, and I won't have to deal with it. Let me just get out of the mess. It's so nice when I can clean up a mess by just hitting Control Z, or Command Z if you're really cool and use a Mac. It's so easy to clean up those messes. The question to ask when you find yourself in that place where you're in a mess or someone else's mess and you're just running over trying to get out of it is, where have you come from and where are you going? Because you might be tempted to think, I just got to get back to that certain place. You know what? I've tried following Jesus. It's not working for me. I'm just going to go back to what was before. I'm just going to go back to what I was doing because I had established a comfortable life, whatever. And you might be tempted to run back and think, that's where I come from. I'm going to head back there. But the truth is this: where you come from, every one of us, is God. He's the one who's given us life and existence. And the thing to do when you're in that mess or in that moment caught up in someone else's mess, or you're running away from a mess, is to stop and ask, where have I come from? And realize you come from God. He gave you life. He gave you existence. And where am I going? Am I going away from the one who gave me life and existence? Or am I going toward him? Where am I going? And here's the good news. You may find yourself running away, wandering in that wilderness. Jesus came looking for you. Maybe no one else has in your life, and that hurts you. Jesus came looking for you. Jesus entered into this mess and took it on himself and made a way for your life to be redeemed. Jesus came because he hears you and he sees you. He hears your cries. He knows what's going on in your life. He sees you. He sees the pain. He sees the frustration. He sees what's been done to you. He also sees what you've done. He hears you. He sees you, but it doesn't just end there. He's not just God in the sky saying, yep, saw you do that. He is God who then enters in and redeems. And that's our hope today. In the midst of our mess making, in the midst of all the messes we create, God sees and hears and he redeems when we put our trust in him. Worship team, would you come back? Look, just because you're a Christian, some of you, you're not a Christian, you're not following Jesus, and you need to hear this today. You need to hear Jesus saying to you, look, I've come looking for you. I see the mess. All you need to do right now is hear my offer. I will redeem it all. I will give you new life. If you'll stop trusting yourself to work that all out and put your trust in me. And this morning, you need to make that decision. If you're watching from home or wherever, or sitting in this room, you need to make that decision and say, Jesus, I am going to put my trust in you. I see what happens when I trust in me and the mess it creates. I'm going to trust in you. But if you're a Christian, that doesn't mean this isn't also for you. Because in the middle of waiting on God's promises, just like Abraham and Sarah, we get impatient and we get anxious. God's promised a new creation. Yeah, but you know what? I think I'd feel a lot better if I just bought a new house right now, or if I just had more money right now, or I had more of this. And we stop trusting God for his promise to give us life and joy. And we start chasing after other things. So if you're a Christian in this room and you've been trying to get the things only God can give, real peace, real lasting joy, real love, trying to get that in other places, then guess what's going to happen? You're going to make messes. You're going to get caught up in messes. And Jesus is saying to us who are Christians, look, guys, you know who I am. I've seen you. I've heard you. I've entered into this world, and I've made a way to redeem this. I know you're frustrated. I know you're impatient, but don't start lashing out when your shortcuts don't work, because your shortcuts will never work. They just make messes. You might be tempted to run away from him. Don't run away from him now. Now's the time to return to following him and follow him with more fervor and more trust than you ever had before. Don't go back to the old way of living. It only takes you to a mess. Return to following him. God sees you and he hears you and he'll redeem you.